My name is Basil Siokos, and I'm the Director of Programming for Doc NYC, America's largest documentary festival. Welcome to Doc NYC Live, which is our series of conversations with filmmakers and special guests from this year's films. Doc NYC has extended our programming in a special encore period, with the majority of our lineup available to watch through this Sunday, November 29th, if you're based in the US or its territories. Tickets and more information are available now on docnyc.net. For the next half hour here on Doc NYC Live, we'll be speaking about the film Stateless. We encourage you to post questions in the comment sections and to share this video with those that might be interested. We have a fantastic panel joining us today. They're going to be joining us as I say their names now. Join me in welcoming the filmmaker behind Stateless, Michèle Stephenson, the film's protagonist, Rosa Iris Diendomi, Clarivel Ruiz, who began the inclusive anti-xenophobic project Dominicans Love Haitians movement, and Eddie Paulino, a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, who has researched and written extensively about Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Thank you all so much for joining us to talk about Stateless today.
Thank you.
So for those watching who have not yet seen Stateless, the film follows attorney and human rights activist Rosa Iris as she fights to protect the rights of Dominican people of Haitian descent, whose citizenship was stripped by the federal government, rendering more than 200,000 people stateless. Michèle, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal connection to the island and how this project came about for you?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from the island. I was born in Haiti to a Haitian father and a Panamanian mother, and have always had relationships with the DR. I have family that married Dominicans. I've learned a lot about the culture growing up, but always, there were always both sides of it. There was the cultural affinities, but there was also the idea of the racial tensions that existed. That's what I grew up in terms of the ethos that was around me. I just finished a feature documentary film, American Promise. We were off of the community engagement campaign with that film. And then the decision came down in Dominican Republic. The Supreme Court denationalized Dominicans of Haitian descent, and birth certificates were annulled from one day to the next. And they made it retroactive to 1929, which made over 200,000 people stateless. And so, you know, coming off of a personal film, it's always sort of the personal that kind of drives the stories that I try to tell. And so, you know, sat down with my partner, thought about this decision and thought, you know, maybe it's time to go back to the island. And, you know, I had done work around the earthquake in Haiti, short films, and learned more about the work that was being done in collaboration between Dominicans and Haitians, especially youth, but also the work that was being done to defend the rights of Dominicans of Haitian descent. That's been on assault for, you know, decades, if not more. And so that's how it started. And I met Rosa Iris during my research travels down there through an organization called Reconocido. And she was working for them in the sugarcane communities, working to get people's papers sort of sorted out.
And if I can ask Rosa, it is about becoming involved with the film. So how did, you know, what was your response when you met Michèle and started talking about the possibility of being followed around and having your work sort of shown on camera about the important work that you're doing on the island?
Clarivel, well, okay. Él quiere saber qué pasó cuando encontraste conmigo. Que la pregunta es, ¿cómo me conociste y cómo tú te interesarte en el documental?
Gracias, Michelle. Buenas tardes. Bueno, fue un encuentro interesantísimo porque Michelle estaba en República Dominicana haciendo contacto con organizaciones para conocer más a fondo lo que estaba pasando con los dominicanos de ascendencia haitiana entre 2013 y 2014. Y recuerdo que nos presentaron porque justamente era como para conceder una entrevista por la experiencia de trabajo que estábamos desarrollando en el este. Después tuvimos otro encuentro y Michelle quería seguir el trabajo que estábamos haciendo en la zona. Y era una oportunidad para ayudar a que el mundo pueda entender lo que estaba pasando en Dominicana. Pues teníamos ya varios años privados del derecho a tener nuestros documentos, habían pasado distintas situaciones, en especial el caso de la sentencia 168-13. Y estábamos como que tratando de digerir una realidad muy dura, donde estaban muertas nuestras esperanzas de por dónde podíamos resolver nuestra situación. Y el movimiento reconocido, pues nada, fue la oportunidad para encontrarnos con Michèle y cada vez que podía seguir nuestro trabajo, ir conociendo de primera mano qué estaba pasando con los dominicanos de ascendencia haitiana.
So for me, it was meeting Michèle was actually an opportunity to bring to the world, to bring greater awareness to what was happening for my community and the Dominicans of Haitian descent. That this last sentence, it's been really a number of years that there's been an onslaught, an assault on the community and their rights. And when the sentencing came down, it was a really even worse sort of demoralizing situation for me. And so being able to meet Michèle and working with Reconocido allowed me to sort of work to figure out ways to amplify the situation that the community was experiencing. And figuring out a way to how to resolve that situation, the work with Michèle sort of helped with that.
Sí, entonces, creo que fue la oportunidad. Quizás en el primer momento no pensamos en que iba a ser un documental, pero conforme fue pasando el tiempo, pues Michèle veía más cosas que parecía insólito, pero era la realidad que vivíamos día a día.
At first, we didn't realize how big of a documentary it was going to be, but as Michèle spent more time with us, we realized that she was seeing more and more, and there was much more. There were much more layers of terrible situations that needed to be told. So,
the film obviously looks at the ramifications of the present day racist, xenophobic laws, but it also looks towards the past and the history of racism on the island through the poetic, magic realist thread of the young woman fleeing the massacre of 1937. Eddie, who's on audio here, I'm wondering if you can maybe provide a little bit of background about that massacre, which probably many people don't know that much about, unfortunately, and sort of, and also talk a little bit about your role with providing historical context for the film.
Yes. So the 1937 Haitian massacre occurred from September through late October, ordered by the Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, and an estimated 12 to 15,000 Haitian men, women, and children, and also Dominicans of Haitian descent, were systematically slaughtered. And it's one of the most egregious examples of genocide or ethnic cleansing against Black people in the Americas in the 20th century. And so I began this as a student, and it became kind of like a life's work because my parents are Dominican, and I wanted to try to understand how, my people could carry out genocide. And so, especially ever since, after I published my book in 2016, Dividing Española, I've also been trying to tell the story in different ways with different collaborators. So I helped co-found the organization called Border of Lights that remembers the victims. And I think that Michèle's film is a kind of, the most recent example of this long struggle in the Dominican Republic for states' rights, citizenship rights, and also for the largest immigrant community and their descendants in the Dominican Republic to be recognized as Dominican citizens.
Great. Thank you for providing that background. Michèle, I'm going to ask you a little bit about sort of your thought process and the importance you saw in acknowledging and including that 1937 massacre as part of this film, sort of looking towards the past and that background by including the story. I'm going to get the name wrong, but Morame, is that right? Sorry if I said that wrong.
Yeah, no, that's right. Moraime. Well, for me, and it's interesting, it's sort of percolating a number of work that I'm doing, this idea of the past is still present. And so for me, the act of rendering people stateless and what Rosa is fighting up against is state-sanctioned genocide. it is the act of what happened in 37 without the violence, right? And even more people are affected. And so I wanted to not just pay homage to the ancestors of that moment, but also understand that behind Rosa, on her shoulders, lies this movement and lies this history that we need to acknowledge in order to be able to move forward. So for me, it was crucial from the very beginning. I wanted to include it in figuring out how to make it work was a challenge, but a journey that I felt was necessary. And really, it's really, you know, connecting Rosa to Moraime. But also, there's another aspect to Moraime's journey that I've come to realize is that for her, freedom is Haiti, right? Getting to the other side of the border is the other, you know, most marginalized country due to global anti-Blackness, but whose own kind of struggle represents the struggle of Black people everywhere. And so with her aspirations towards that land to see if she could get there is also sort of a bit of a metaphor too for the greater struggle of Black people everywhere across this hemisphere.
In addition to Moraime and Rosa, the other central figure in the film is Gladys, who represents the sort of more virulent nationalist perspective, which sort of the champion of the racial caste system that's in place. Michèle, can you talk about how you found her? Was there a casting process involved in terms of like finding different people with this kind of ideology? And talk a little bit about sort of the importance of including that perspective within the film.
Sure. So I'll start with the first thing. In terms of the importance, it was really for us to understand in flesh and bones sort of what Rosa Iris and the community is up against, right? But also it was the casting process was very intentional. The field producers in the DR were amazing to work with and to collaborate with, and there were a number of people we interviewed, some of whom were largely men and were very aggressive in their ideology and how they even communicated with me. And it felt extremely toxic in terms of my thinking about, okay, am I going to spend a year? Am I going to spend 2 years with this person in terms of their ideology? And will their message, will the nuance and complexity of what it means to, with this ideology come through? Will we be able to dismiss them? Gladys is harder to dismiss. She could be my aunt, she could be my neighbor quite easily, you know, both in terms of some of the things she says and how she thinks, but also in terms of us sort of connecting with her and seeing aspects of her. So it makes that whole ideology and that kind of more complicated and important. I mean, so when we did land on Gladys, I felt, okay, you know, being in her, it was a toxic situation for me, but much more tolerable in terms of my ability to communicate with her. But also she represents, you know, it's the iron in the velvet glove type of thing. How sometimes this ideology is presented in a way that sometimes we don't even, you know, we don't even absorb it. So that was very important.
And Clarivel, I'm going to turn to you now. On the opposite side of Gladys, you're part of an organization, a movement called Dominicans Love Haitians movement. Can you talk a little bit about that and about how the diasporic community has reacted to the citizenship laws that are in place that are so divisive? Can you talk a little bit about what you do and about the movement?
Yeah, thank you, Basil, for your question. So Dominicans Love Haitians movement, it's we're using art as a foundation to unlearn racism and to decolonize so that we can heal from the issues of colonization that you know, all of us as Black people have to deal with, everyone who has dealt with being colonized have to deal with. And so we started in 2016 bringing together Dominicans and Haitians to celebrate our commonalities, because most times what most people always would talk about is like, oh, you're so vastly different. You have so many things that are different about you. And it was just like, well, what's different? What, that we're human? Like what at the foundation, like there is really nothing that is different. We are in this island that was colonized by one entity, and then another entity came and, you know, place themselves on the other side of the island. You know, like there really is no difference between who we are as human beings, except of course the socialization continues to say that we are, and so people believe that when in reality we aren't, right? And so our mission is really to have people understand what this caste system, what this racialized caste system has done to us as people, so that we could start dismantling and unraveling that context, that so that we no longer have to live or abide by these rules that were made up, because race is a made up context, right? A conversation. And so we have to start undoing that conversation. And so in bringing together Dominicans and Haitian artists as the first wave, it was so that we could start doing that work of healing what has transpired, especially when we went in 2009, it was our first experience really dealing with what racialization looks like on the island in the Dominican Republic versus what we have known growing up here in the United States. And so inside of that, we were like, well, this healing has to really transpire. And at that point, there was a momentum that we could see towards like denationalizing, right? There were instances where there was many difficulties with Dominicans of Haitian descent being able to receive their IDs, being able to receive services. And then you could see that there was something that was percolating, right? When we started investigating, we were like, oh, something's about to happen. And then of course the law started being changed according to that. And according to, you know, what has been mandated from Trujillo, even though Trujillo is no longer alive, but his, you know, inside of his judiciary, inside of the government that he created, we're still right now being impacted by his ideology that continues to frame so many Dominicans, and inside of, you know, everyone that he impacted. And so here we are, you know, and we are still dealing with the ramifications. There are those who are in complete opposition to what it is that we're creating, right? And then there are those who are in alignment, being like, yeah, there is a uplifting, you know, an undoing of what has been created, and a realization of who we are as Black people. Because that information was an attempt to erase all our Blackness, all our African ancestry in the Dominican Republic. And so here we are, there are so many more of our youth who are like, yeah, no, we are this, and we want to know about what racism looks like, and we want to, you know, start doing the work of healing ourselves and of like dealing with whatever that level of discrimination, racial discrimination, that keeps us separated and keeps us, you know, this idea that we are separate and different from each other. And so that's the work that we're doing. And just like, you know, any other country, you know, there's that tension that Michèle was talking, that tension of what we know and what we don't know, and in the discovery, and hopefully inside of the discovery, that there are those things that you thought you knew, like Gladys, you know, in the movie, she thinks that she knows something, she goes on a journey to discover something, and then it gets kind of like, you know, her realities get kind of hit, right? And so that we all have to deal with those realities, the things that we've been told, and the truth of what's really out here inside of the discovery. So we hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And I want to come back to you, but I want to turn back to Rosa first with sort of a two-part question. One is, we learn in the film, Rosa, that your advocacy work led to threats against you and your family, and then you were forced to leave the DR and seek asylum in the US. The important question is sort of, how are you doing? How are you adjusting to life in exile, as it were? And can you tell us, is there anything that can be done practically by outsiders, by people, you know, by the community in the diaspora, by others that are concerned, to try to help in some way reverse the law? Is that even possible? Or what are the steps that might take place in order for things to get better and to return citizenship, if that's even possible, to people like those shown in the film?
Rosa Iris, Basil pregunta si, bueno, en la película vemos que tuviste que coger asilo al resultado de las amenazas que habías recibido y que ahora él quiere saber cómo te sientes ahora en los Estados Unidos en asilo, en asilo, ¿cómo es que tú te sientes? Primera parte de la pregunta. Y la segunda parte es que quería saber qué se puede hacer en la diáspora o la gente que está afuera para ayudar a cambiar la situación en Dominicana. Entonces son dos partes, dos preguntas.
Gracias, Michelle. Bueno, es un gran reto para los dominicanos de ascendencia haitiana haber hecho todo este trayecto desde 2007, 2008, en una lucha pacífica. Y esto yo quiero resaltarlo porque jóvenes de comunidades empobrecidas, con pocas herramientas y recursos, decidir salir a promover y defender su derecho ante sectores con discursos de odio, con una marcada segregación, fue un gran desafío. Entonces, nuestra filosofía es que reclamar mi derecho no me lleve a violentar el derecho de los demás. Y así nos mantuvimos, bueno, hasta el día de hoy es la filosofía del movimiento reconocido y así llevamos nuestra lucha. Desafortunadamente, poner el dedo en la llaga, ser irreverente, decir las cosas como son, tiene un precio. Y abrazar la lucha de los desnacionalizados, de los que soy parte, yo soy dominicana de ascendencia haitiana, como sabrán, mi papá es haitiano, era inaceptable quedarme callada. Como mujer negra, como activista, trabajadora social y como abogada, tenía todos los elementos para denunciar lo que estaba pasando. Y no solo llevar un discurso, sino tener las pruebas. Conocí a la gente, conviví con ella. Es muy doloroso ver cómo a las personas se le ha paralizado la vida por tantos años sin que nadie responda o le compense el daño que se le ha hecho. Es difícil vivir, en la película yo creo que lo digo, no es fácil tú vivir como extranjero en tu propio país, que ni siquiera puedes moverte con libertad. Entonces, dado el número de amenazas y demostración de que cada X tiempo las amenazas aumentaban con un alto nivel de materializarse, al extremo de que se llevan un día a mi hijo de la escuela y pasan otros hechos, y hay una indiferencia de las autoridades competentes, no hacen nada pues para preservar mi integridad física y la de mis hijos, que eran los que estaban como que en primera línea, la gente con la que más me amenazaban. Me vi en la obligación de salir del país cuando se probó que sí, había mucha posibilidad de que pudieran materializar las amenazas que venían haciendo desde 2013. Y bueno, sorprendente, ante una situación del gobierno federal aquí cerrado y otras cosas políticas, sometí mi asilo a finales de agosto y ya en noviembre tenía una respuesta positiva. Hay que presentar muchas pruebas y todo esto, pero en un momento yo me sentí que era una mujer cobarde porque había huido, pero al mismo tiempo entendí lo que me tocó reflexionar. Ser un mártir en algún momento no es la mejor decisión si tú no vas a aportar a la causa. No quería abandonar mi país. Recuerdo que salí y meses después regresé, porque yo decía, yo no voy a huir, pero me vi en la necesidad de hacerlo, porque había un alto riesgo. Pero aquí estamos. Eso como para dejar la primera parte respondida. Michelle, ¿o quieres que responda todo?
Es que ¿cómo te sientes ahora? Voy a decir, I'll say what she's done so far, but she hasn't gotten to how she feels. ¿Cómo te sientes? Pero voy a traducir ahora para que dice, she's basically saying that the protest that has happened in the Dominican Republic through Reconocido has always been a nonviolent, right? It's always been about nonviolent protest to claim one's rights and to claim one's rights while not infringing the rights of others. And she felt compelled to participate, being of Haitian descent herself, her being a Black woman, educated Black woman. She felt she had to use the tools she had to denounce. And especially even as she saw that there was no form of repair for those who were involved, for the people who were affected. But the threats got so intense against her, and the indifference of the government just made her exposed. So she had to leave. And she left, and she got asylum surprisingly very quickly. She applied in August, got it in November with much of proof that she presented. But there were moments where she felt like she had been a coward because of escaping, that you can't help but feel that sort of sense of being a coward. And she actually even went back and saying, I don't want to leave my country, but felt so threatened that she came back to the United States and realized that being a martyr is also not the solution. It's not the solution to defending rights. So this is where she is now.
Gracias. Y bueno, aquí estoy. Me siento, quisiera decir, estoy bien, pero es un reto. Migrar tiene muchas situaciones encontradas. Y cuando se hace en el contexto en el que me tocó, pues tú en el fondo sientes que hay algo que falta por hacer y continuar. Pero estoy con todo el ánimo de seguir adelante. Gracias a las redes sociales puedo mantener contacto con muchas de las personas que yo he estado ayudando y acompañando sus casos. Puedo dar la asesoría. A veces uno se siente impotente ante la realidad de lo poco que se ha avanzado en la solución del problema. Al contrario, yo siento que se ha retrocedido porque del 2018 para acá incluso ni siquiera pueden manifestarse las personas afectadas y uno siente que desde aquí no puede hacer lo suficiente. Pero sí estoy aprovechando la parte positiva que tiene esto de seguir toda mi formación académica para poder tener mejores herramientas para seguir apoyando nuestra causa. Voy aprendiendo y tratando de emerger en la comunidad afro acá en Estados Unidos y emerger en la cultura, porque bueno, estoy en un país donde mi primer desafío es la lengua y yo me río ahora, pero en algunos momentos yo me sentía que no quería ni salir a la calle porque no podía comunicarme, no podía expresarme. Pero voy avanzando ante los retos y desafíos que tengo. He encontrado en este último año una comunidad de apoyo que me ha permitido ir creciendo y como que haciendo ese proceso de adaptación. Y bueno, puedo decir que en este momento lo que necesitaría cualquier persona migrante es apoyo y solidaridad, y lo he ido encontrando en la comunidad de la diáspora aquí y de otras personas que me están apoyando independientemente de que no sean de la diáspora. ¿Qué podemos hacer? Lo primero es entender tanto la diáspora como la audiencia que nos acompaña en este día. El problema no está resuelto. Desafortunadamente, las autoridades en mi país han querido vender la idea de que no hay apatridia en República Dominicana, de que está solucionado el tema de la desnacionalización. Sin embargo, con mucho dolor tenemos que decir que la ley que nació para sanar el daño que hicieron, lo que ha hecho es segregar, dividir a la población afectada. No tenemos hasta el momento ningún instrumento para devolver la nacionalidad a los miles de desnacionalizados y personas apátridas. Y creo que nos pueden ayudar difundiendo, levantando su voz, enviando cartas a nuestras embajadas en sus diferentes países de que es necesario de que el Estado vuelva a su legalidad y devuelva la nacionalidad a las personas que le fue arrebatada. Porque es un muy mal precedente, no solo para República Dominicana, sino para los países de la región. Me daría mucha vergüenza que tomaran el ejemplo de República Dominicana y lo siguieran reproduciendo en otros países.
So how do I feel? It's been a real challenge to be here in the United States. But thanks to social media, on the one hand, I've been able to stay in touch with people in Dominican Republic and even help with people's cases through the social media communications. But still, sometimes I feel impotent on how things have not changed. And in fact, in some cases, they've actually gone back. But I'm trying to take the positive. I'm immersing myself in the Black community here and learning the language. At first, the language was a tremendous challenge for me. At times, I didn't even want to leave the house because of my inability to communicate. But I have found a community, and I think as immigrants, the priority for us is to find communities of solidarity and support, and I have found that now, and that has, helped me build greater strength. And I've also have been able to hone my skills as a human rights advocate through some of the courses I've been taking and the scholarships that I've gotten. What can we do? One, as a diaspora and people outside, is to understand that this issue is not over. That in spite of the messaging of the government that is saying the opposite, there is still no law that is allows those who have been denationalized to become full rights citizens. The laws that have been issued, all they do is further divide and segregate our population and communities. There's no measure today that exists to reclaim one's citizenship. So understanding that exists, raise your voice, send letters to embassies, because what the Dominican Republic has done is a terrible precedent, not just for the country, but for the entire region.
Finalmente.
Rosa, yo creo que, okay. Sí, okay.
Okay. Bueno, no, realmente decir, una de las formas que estoy usando ahora para seguir denunciando lo que estamos viviendo es a través de la poesía. Entonces llegó un momento en que comencé a escribir y he tenido la oportunidad de compartir en varios espacios como para poder seguir comunicando esta situación.
I've also been using poetry to communicate the situation through what I've lived through, and I've had spaces where in my community to be able to express some of these lived experiences through poetry.
We do have to start wrapping up, but I do want to ask an important question, and this is for Michèle, but I do want Clarivel to also talk about this if possible briefly. The first part of the question is, have you been able to show the film in the DR or Haiti yet? And if not, do you have plans? And are you aware of any kind of official or unofficial response from the DR government about the media attention that the film has generated from being at Hot Docs and other festivals and reviews and that kind of thing? And then the second part of it really is about your outreach plan, and sort of maybe Clarivel can talk about sort of how the community of the diaspora can sort of engage with the film to help sort of get the word out there.
Yeah, sure. At the moment, the film has not been shown on the island yet in an official capacity, and we are sort of collaborating with the organization that Rosa Iris is a part of, Reconocido, to really strategically plan, because once it does show there are further dangers that may arise. And so we want to make sure that it's in partnership with those on the ground, that they really kind of control the narrative and when to show it. So we've been in communication with Reconocido. They've seen the film internally and are working on a way to release it, potentially after, once, the pandemic, when we're on the other side of the other side of the pandemic, because as you know, access to Wi-Fi and that kind of stuff is not as prominent for many folks. So I think we would really rely on a more community sort of based screening of the film there, as well as being very strategic. Yeah, we have not received any sort of backlash or responses, but maybe Clarivel can speak to the work that you're doing and the kind of responses you're getting here and threats that you are receiving here in New York. Based on the work that you're doing, that is not just about the film, but that basically there's risk being taken right here in the diaspora as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's very loaded, when you're doing the work of unlearning racism, and there are those who are in complete opposition to your desire to see how we currently live as a, that we're a threat. And I think as artists, you know, we always have to recognize that we are a threat to people because we see life in another way, right? We can envision what is possible versus how there are those who continue to want to abide by certain societal rules. And so, you know, in June of this year, we posted something on Instagram about taking down the statue of Juan Pablo Duarte that's here in New York, or replacing it, we should say, replacing it with another statue of a famous woman, Mama Tingo, who was an environmentalist and a community leader and was subsequently killed in the Dominican Republic by the government. And so we were like, well, let's replace it. Let's replace one statue with this person who really stands for what we're creating right now in this moment. And we've been bombarded by a lot of Dominican nationalists who are, you know, who have this ideology about what Dominicanness is. And so anyone who stands against is seen as a threat, and who vocalizes what they envision for themselves. Any artist, any, you know, any organization, any nonprofit, you are a threat to certain people who want to stay, you know, inside of this, as we say, white supremacy. And we can see it here in the United States, right? Like it is not any different than what we experience here as well, and what people experience overseas. The difference is that, or not, the difference is, in this sense, sometimes the immediate threat, like what Rosa experienced with her child being taken, you know, like that's immediate, like that's right here, right now, versus thankfully we're in quarantine. So we have, you know, there may not be that in kind of level of engagement currently. What will 2021 bring? We don't, 2022, who knows? But for right now, we're thankfully in a place that we're safe. But that's not the case for so many of us. You know, as we can see through history, journalists, artists whose lives are taken because they are truth tellers, because they want to actually shift and change society, and not continue to abide by certain rules and regulations that are created to only support a limited amount of people, right? And so, yeah. So that's what we would like to.
Just to speak to the community engagement part of the film, both Clarivel and Dominicans of Haitians and Eddie Paulino, both as a historian as well as Border of Lights, are part of a working group that we've created with the support of POV, their engagement campaign division, because the film was picked up by POV and will be part of the season next year in 2021. We're developing curriculum and other community screening plans, as well as the NFB is also helping us create that as a cohort. So we're working, there's the working group, we're meeting regularly to get this, the guides and the curriculum and the community screenings planned out for next year as the film rolls out for the broadcast.
Excellent. Well, we do have to wrap up, but I do want to thank all of you so much for joining us and having this conversation about Stateless today on Doc NYC Live. As a reminder for those watching in the US, if you haven't yet had a chance to see Stateless, tickets are still available to watch the film anytime, day or night, through this Sunday. You can visit docnyc.net for tickets and for more information. This also marks the final session of Doc NYC Live for this year, or for this time period anyway. We have assembled a great archive of past talks that people can check out on Facebook Live, so check them out. Thanks again to Michèle and Rosa, Clarivel, and to Eddie as well for taking part in this. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.